even with all that's going on in the world, I'm just sort of more, I don't struggle with the way things are so much. I may like them or not like them. I may react or not respond, but there's not a struggle against just the beingness of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly noticing that.
Yeah.
And people, I had a visitor a week ago who I hadn't seen for a few years, and she says, "You've changed." And I said, "Oh yeah." She says, "You've become softer," you know. And if that's true, it's good. It's a sign of kind of loosening inside.
You used to work in palliative care.
Yeah.
And I think you're familiar with the book by Bronnie Ware, The Palliative Care Nurse, The Five Regrets of the Dying.
Yeah.
What I thought would be interesting today for our fourth conversation on my podcast together is to maybe go through each of those 5 regrets, because I'd love to know from your perspective what each of these regrets says about where we are, who we are, what things are important to us.
Yeah.
And so the first of those 5 regrets is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
Yeah. And so let's keep in mind that, like when I used to work in palliative care, which I did for 7 years, and this nurse who wrote the book, she's Australian, and she wrote the book about 12 years ago now. They weren't talking about people dying at old age. They were mostly, it's about people dying before their time. And so the regrets that they had as their terminal illness, usually malignancy or perhaps chronic autoimmune disease, brought them to the end of their physical existence. What did they regret? And the top one was, I wish I had the courage to live my own life rather than the one that people expected of me. I would reframe that because there's a deep truth in it. And as you know, and perhaps we've talked about, from my point of view, very often the people that do develop chronic illness are people that have suppressed their own true selves for the sake of being accepted to others. And that self-suppression has deep physiological consequences on the immune system, on the nervous system, on the heart, and so on. So that self-suppression is also physiological self-annihilation in some ways. But when she talks about courage, that's a self-judgment. They're saying to themselves, I wish I'd had the courage, as if it was a question of cowardice. It isn't. It's a question of programming. Like you and I are both parents, we know this. No infant is born suppressing themselves. No infant enters the first day on this earth trying to please anybody. They're just being purely themselves, expressing their joy when it's there, expressing their upset, their distress when that's dominant, but they're purely themselves. So that what she calls courage, or what these people call courage of being myself, is actually a trauma imprint that for some reason they learned early in life, that to be themselves is to court rejection by their environment. So it's not a lack of courage. You can't talk about a 1-year-old lacking courage or a 2-year-old. It's simply an adaptation. Now, later on, they say courage, but really, that courage or the lack of it is a shorthand for something happened to me that I gave up my true self for the sake of being accepted. And that cost me. First of all, it cost them in terms of physical illness, but also cost them in terms of self-respect and dignity. It's a major one.
Yeah. Are you living a life at the moment that's true to yourself?
I am now. I sense that I have. I believe that I am. That doesn't mean every second I do, but on the whole I do, and it feels really good. And I know you and I had dinner last night, and you were telling me that you're finding yourself far more self-expressed and comfortable with who you are than you used to. So that's the good news, people, is that this is a process that can continue for a lifetime.
Yeah.
But I really see that people who suppress themselves really suffer.
Yeah. So that first regret, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself. I'm really glad you picked out the word courage, because that word also stands out to me.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to use that word.
Yeah. Well, it's a self-judgment, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
You know, I could have done better. I should have had the courage, is what that kind of says.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Gabor, you said when you turned 80, or as a consequence of you turning 80, you realized that, 13 years ago you gave it your medical practice.
Yeah.
Will you be alive in 13 years? That's very striking.
Yeah.
Are you afraid of death?
In principle, I'm not, but I don't really know till I have to face it. I won't know how afraid I am until it confronts me, At this point, I feel healthy and I get to do what I want to do, and I have vigor and I have interests and excitement and love and likes and dislikes, and I'm quite alive, What happens when I have to confront the actuality of it? I have no idea how I'm going to respond. So sometimes I get fear around it. I mean, I don't want to give this up. I don't want to give up this life. But other times I say, well, if I do, I've lived and it's been good and there's not much to regret, So yes and no, but I won't really know until I'm up against it.
You've spoken publicly before about your journeys with plant medicine.
Yeah.
Does that change anything for you, I guess, or has that changed anything in terms of how you may view what happens at the end of human life? Because many people will say for them it does change how they perceive themselves, how they perceive death, how they perceive what this experience of life actually really is.
Well, specifically, as you're probably aware, they have done studies on end-of-life anxiety with psilocybin, so-called magic mushrooms. And people report spiritual experiences, and people report a significant abatement of anxiety they had on dying. These are people who are terminally ill, and nothing that the medical profession could offer to reverse the course of their fatal illness. But they had much less anxiety about dying as a result of those spiritual experiences that were induced by taking the mushroom.
Yeah.
For me, I've never faced death in that sense. When I think of some of my psychedelic experiences, and if in retrospect I allow myself to sink into them, I can say in that state I would not be afraid of death. I'd say that there's a larger reality than the persistence or cessation of this particular lung represents, I would say that if I project myself back into those experiences. Again, how I will face it when it happens or when it becomes inevitable, I don't know.
Yeah. Society's view, or this society's view of people getting older, 80 seems to be the age where we often expect people to be doing less, being less mobile, less vital. Not everyone, of course, but many.
Yeah.
You seem to be someone who has this love of life, this vigor, this message you want to share. You seem to be traveling all over the globe at, pretty regular intervals. You've come into London for 4 days. You're going to help me do some teaching with doctors tomorrow, which is incredible. But a lot of 80-year-olds are not doing that.
Yeah.
Right? And the longevity space within medicine has really exploded over the last few years. People love talking about longevity, right? And I think we're missing something in our discussions about longevity. Well, I think there's a couple of things. But
what do you think we're missing?
I think it depends what you mean by longevity, first of all, right?
Yeah.
So yes, some people want to know, how can I not necessarily live longer, but be independent, mobile, vital as long as I live. So health span versus lifespan.
Yeah.
And I get that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of talk these days about extending lifespan, living to 150 and beyond, and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And I don't want to stand in the way of human progress at all. One of my fears is that in pursuit of living longer, are we missing something about the beauty and the essence of what life really is? Life is finite. The fact that it's finite is what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah.
If we could live to 200, would we have even more of these regrets because we'd keep taking life for granted?
You know what? You're talking my language, because to tell you the truth, to coin a phrase, all this stuff about longevity bores me to death. I just don't care. What really matters is, what does this moment bring us, or what can we bring to this moment? Let the future take care of itself. Like Jesus says, take no thought for tomorrow, And I really think that this longevity movement is a sign of deep social anxiety. When especially you get these rich people in California with their cryo technology of freezing the body, hoping that 100 years from now they'll be able to unfrozen and there'll be treatments for the, it bores me. What really matters is, for me, is what makes life meaningful and active and engaged in the present moment. And it's interesting, in English, we talk about growing older. Now, that's a very telling phrase, because in significant ways, when we get older, we shrink. Like our bodies, our skin starts to sag, our muscles are no longer as, supple and strong as they used to be. So what does it mean to grow older? We could just say, like you said earlier, get older, which is just a chronological progression. But growing older implies that this growth is actually possible. So in what sense can we actually grow? And I think actually we can actually grow into the present moment and grow in our appreciation for life and what matters, and knowing what doesn't matter, and growing in wisdom. Indigenous cultures, they don't talk about elderly, they talk about elders.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So I think there's a natural reverence for age that senior cultures would respect, and modern society kind of dismisses, Now, do I wish that my hair was blacker and more curly the way it used to be? Yeah, I do, and it wasn't gray and my hair wasn't thinning at the top, and I wish that. But at the same time, I would not want to be as unconscious as I was when my hair was blacker and curlier,
Yeah, this is such an interesting point. I've spoken to several menopause experts on this show over the past few years. And I remember when doing some research on one of the conversations, I came across research showing that in cultures where women are revered as they get older, their wisdom is respected, they're seen as really important parts of the community.
Right.
Those cultures report less menopausal symptoms.
Isn't that interesting?
Just so I'm not misinterpreted, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that means that all menopausal symptoms would go away if that was the case. I just find it interesting that when the cultural view of growing old is different, we perceive ourselves as having, I don't know, a different symptom profile, if I can put it like that.
And the degree of suffering is different, so that maybe they have symptoms or maybe they have certain features, but the suffering is not experienced the same way.
Please expand on that, because I think some people will go, what do you mean? If you're either getting symptoms or you're not getting symptoms, explain what you mean by perception of, the suffering, essentially.
Well, I was talking to somebody else about this today. So as you and I know, in Western medicine, we kind of medicalize everything. And so we talk about premenstrual syndrome. Now, which PMS, it's a syndrome, it's a medical entity. What is it really? Is that under the impact of hormonal changes, women get more sensitized. So they might have more physical pain and more upset, but we could see that as pathological, or we could actually say that it's a time of truth-telling, that the hormones do sensitize them to things that are not functioning in their lives, which the rest of the time they're acculturated to acquiesce with and to put up with.
Yeah.
But the menstrual ferment in their bodies makes it less tolerable. So instead of seeing it as a pathology, we could see it as a time of insight. And what if they actually listen to their bodies and listen to what their body's saying no to, that the rest of the month they kind of suppress? Then that could be seen as a time of wisdom rather than a time of suffering. So the physical things are there, but it doesn't have to be experienced as suffering.
No.
It could be experienced as a time of truth-telling. And actually, a lot of women have told me that. Once they become aware of that, their relationship to menstruation is totally different. And I think that's what you're saying about menopause as well.
Yeah. This kind of speaks to the second regret, which is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, I agree that for many women, and I can think of so many patients like this, their hormonal symptoms were actually showing them that the way you're currently living is not in harmony with your body.
Exactly.
Now, of course, sometimes people struggle to make change. It's hard to make change. Maybe their life is mega stressful, and at that moment, they can't change it for whatever reason. And I empathize with that. I understand.
Yeah.
But for some people who are able to, sometimes it's one of the best things that has happened to them.
Yeah. Now, this thing of I wish I hadn't worked so hard, that's an interesting one, because I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And what do I mean by that? Speaking for myself, and I don't know if this is true for you, but I became a physician for some really good reasons. One of them was I genuinely wanted to help suffering humanity. And I thought medicine is a perfect pathway through which I could help people. That's genuine, and I meant it. I also chose a profession where I was fairly confident of making a decent living so I could support a life for myself and my family. That's legitimate. But those reasons don't make you work too hard. They make you work hard, but they don't make you work too hard. What makes you work too hard, and that's what these people are saying, is you're driven by something that you're not even aware of. And what I wasn't aware of when I went to medical school and when I was a physician for decades is how driven I was to justify my existence in the world and to prove that I was important and worthwhile and so on. And that had to do with the loss of that confidence owing to early childhood trauma. And so it's not a question, nobody says, I wish I hadn't worked hard. To achieve something in life, you have to work hard. They're saying, I wish I hadn't worked too hard. And that too part, the TOO part, comes from being driven by unconscious needs to validate your existence, where why should any human being have to validate their existence? You know? And so that's what they're saying. And when you're driven to work too hard, you actually ignore what matters. And what matters is what you were telling me last night about how much it matters for you to spend time with your family. So every summer you take a bunch of weeks away from your podcast and you just spend time enjoying your kids and your wife and your family. And I didn't do that. For me, it was very hard to even take holidays. I always felt I had to keep working. If somebody was pregnant, oh my God, what if I would miss their delivery? Like the baby couldn't enter the world without me, you know? So that drivenness is what makes people work too hard. And so it's not a matter of working hard, it's a matter of working too hard. And where does that come from? Again, that comes from childhood trauma.
A lot of doctors, and I have several friends like this, they don't take their full allowance of annual leave. Sounds like you may have been similar.
I had that tendency, yeah.
Yeah, and often people will say, and I have a friend who says this, yeah, but my patients need me.
No, they don't need them. They need medical help.
Yeah. But I think we have to ask ourselves, and this is very, very common in medicine, actually. I'm sure it's common in other professions as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you don't take your full allowance of annual leave that your contract entitles you to. It's often paid time off, right? It's part of your job.
Yeah.
When you're not taking it, of course, there can be reasons for that. There can be reasonable reasons. There can be work reasons. But if you're not, I think it may be worth reflecting on some of those underlying, those real drivers of that.
Well, it occurs to me that what your friend is actually saying is not that my patients need me, but I need my patients to feel okay. And when I'm not working to help them, I don't know who I am and I don't feel comfortable with myself. So I need them. Now that means get thee to a therapist and deal with it. And not only that, even your capacity to help your patients over time will be eroded.
Totally.
By the way you're stressing yourself and you're not taking care of yourself. And physicians are notoriously programmed to ignore themselves. And there was a very interesting study that I mentioned in the book, The Myth of Normal. They looked at the fraying of the chromosomes of people. And, when we're born, we were born with certain structures called telomeres, and telomeres are DNA structures at the end of our chromosomes. And their fraying and their shortening is a mark of aging and of stress. And they looked at the telomeres of medical residents compared to other people their age. They age faster, they fray faster. Yeah. And so physicians are driven to actually not spare themselves and to literally consume themselves in the work. Now, in the long term, that may make you a very popular and very successful doctor, but in the long term, it's going to be at the expense of your marriage and of your children and of your own mental and physical health.
For me, if I look at that situation and I reflect on society and culture, what I see these days is it's very me-focused culture where community has been gradually eroded out.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we think about a human being needs to feel that they're of value to other people. We need that. In our tribes, 50,000 years ago, we would have felt of value because we would have a role and other people would see that role. They would benefit from it and we would benefit from the things they were doing, whether it's someone's hunting, someone's gathering, someone's putting the fire on, whatever it might be. In this me-focused culture where it's all me, 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 and what are my needs and what do I need to do and how can I better myself, I feel that we often don't feel of value to others. We don't feel important. And so it makes sense that in that culture, you might overwork. You might keep pushing yourself because if you're not working and feeling important there, then actually you may not have that sensation in any other aspects of your life.
Well, if you weren't given it's very simple. If in early childhood you're given the sense that you're valued, just because you existed, your parents welcome you and validate you and value you and celebrate you just because you are, then you don't have to keep proving it afterwards. Mm-hmm. But if you don't get that sense, then you have to be important.
Yeah.
So that sense of needing to be important has to come from missing out on being valued for who you are or being only valued for your achievements. You're valued. Like, look, my parents, bless their souls, but they valued my intelligence, and so a lot of my persona was caught up in being smart and proving my value that way. Well, it's good to be intelligent, but your value doesn't depend on or shouldn't depend on any one quality, whether you're cute or cuddly or handsome or successful or good at sports or smart in school or any of that. Your value is intrinsic, innate. inherent because you're a human being. In this society, as you say, it tends to value people for what they do. And so that can become very, very addictive. But again, going back to your friend who says, my patients need me, and you think about it, and I'm not accusing them of anything, but they're not realizing just how egotistical that statement is. It's as if it depended on them.
Mm-hmm.
Their patients need good medical care, but they don't need him or her or